Good morning, quilters. We are bringing you a live, fun little project today. My name is Colleen Tauke, and I'm your instructor for these fun little live projects that we do about every other week or so. I'm hoping that you can easily find the pattern. The download will be in the link will be in the comments. I'm sure a QR code will probably pop up soon, and it will also lead you to the pattern and the template that you're going to need for today's project. Now, if you're printing the template, make sure it's at 100% so it goes all the way to the edges of the paper so that you get the proper size. If it's off by a little bit, because this isn't pieced patchwork, it will be fine. So know that this is one of those projects that you can just relax and have fun doing. Now, this one's called the ice cream koozie or cozy, because when you're eating ice cream out of these containers, you know that when you're holding onto it, it's melting, it's getting soft all around the edges, and you can't eat fast enough to keep from having melted ice cream. But something to keep your hands from getting frostbite and keep your ice cream from melting so quickly, these wonderful little koozies are kind of reminiscent of the way my father would have eaten ice cream and always did. Now, you know that we've made these bowl koozies in the past, and the link for this will be in the comments also if you haven't seen this, because I think there are a whole group of quilters out there who made bowl cozies like this, and then there was tons and tons available, and then there are new quilters who've never done one before, so the template and the instructions are for this. But when my dad ate ice cream, it was the whole kitchen soup bowl, and it was huge serving of ice cream. So this would have been my dad's way to keep his hands from being cold or having his ice cream melt too fast. But let's go a little more portion control and try to go a little smaller for those individual portions that you can buy in the grocery store or the convenience store. So we're going to make the the ice cream koozie today. Remember to pop in and say hello, good morning. We've got Linda saying good morning from Alexandria, Virginia, and Esther, who's popping in from the Netherlands. Hi, Esther. Angela says good morning. We are so glad that you guys are checking out what we're working on today. Kelly from Arizona is popping in. Our watchers that always are back every single time. I'd love to see your names pop in, guys. And Lisa from Wisconsin, of course. So the design for this, I decided that if we could use pre-cut 10-inch squares, that would be really kind of a fun way to make these. So that if you happen to purchase a set of 10-inch squares and you're like, I don't know what I'm ever going to use those for. They spoke to me in the store. I brought them home, but now they don't have a place. And there may be some things, the fabrics that might appeal to family and friends. You could make a bunch of these. This would be a fun little housewarming gift for maybe someone who's got a new house, a new baby, something just for the parents. It might be something for grandparents even to have that individual ice cream koozie that they can hold onto when they're making or having ice cream. So the 10-inch squares are what we're going to be using in this. And then 10-inch squares of batting. Now, if you're like me, you have so many pieces of batting laying around, leftover pieces, and they're strips off of projects you've made. You hate to throw away those little pieces of batting. So you know what? Zigzag them together. Sometimes we call this Franken batting by just overlapping or just mating up two pieces, two cut edges right next to each other. You can zigzag down through that, and that'll hold it good enough for a project like this. This isn't going to be a bed quilt that's going to be washed a zillion times. We're going to quilt through it, but it's not going to take the that pull and push like a bed quilt or a baby quilt would. So you can easily join up those strips and use up those pieces. We're just going to need one piece in this project. And since this is ice cream and it's never going to, your cozy's never going in the microwave, you can use up the battings that are multiple different kinds of fiber content. when you made the bowl koozies that were going in the microwave, you needed to make sure it didn't have any polyester or scrim or anything. It had to be the 100% cotton for those. But for this one, we can use up just about everything. So let's see, we've got Grandma Bird says also you can use as flower pot decorative holder. Hey, now there's another idea. I guess if you've got little starts of plants, and this is very similar to the size of a flower pot. If you've got some little starts, you can slide that in there and you can make that also a flower pot decorative surround. Perfect. Okay. See, creativity just gets going when quilters get together. Shelly says good morning. Peggy says good morning from Missouri. I gotta really quick see here. Dixie says good morning from Denver, Colorado, and Patrice says good morning from Georgia. We are glad that you are joining us. Dawn is over in Minnesota saying good morning. So glad that you guys are out here watching and having some fun. Now, the fun part about this also is if you have some 10-inch, you can get a 10-inch square out of some really fun fabrics. I'm going to use the dreaded Hawkeye fabric today. My moderator is a Hawkeye fan, and my youngest brother is an Iowa graduate. And if anybody watches women's basketball, I shouldn't say girls, women's basketball, and there's a Caitlin Clark fan, she originated her college career at the University of Iowa. But I have made my husband an Iowa State one because we are Iowa Staters. I made myself a fun floral one. But the fun part is you can personalize it. He also is a veteran from the Army. So he spent a couple of years in the U.S. Army. So I have mated the Iowa State fabric with an Army print so that his is just made for him and no one else. So you can have a lot of fun going through your scraps of fabric, making the personalized ones. Maybe you want to make them for grandkids. Maybe you have some really fun novelty prints or favorite colors that they would really enjoy. And that's the fun of having that stash of fabric in multiple colors, lots of prints you can mate up. So we're going to work with our 10-inch squares here. I've got mine already cut. And in the pattern, I'm trying to think, is there any other fabric marking pencil or tool of some sort? And then a template plastic, if possible, or cardboard, if you're going to making multiple ones of these. Now, the template is going to look something similar to this. When you print it off, it's only a quarter of the template. So note the different markings on there where the fold lines and stuff, and I'm going to show you how to use that. So if you trace it out, you can either put it onto like a cardboard, a poster board. You could use template plastic. If you're going to make a lot of these, it's a lot easier to trace a more rigid surface like this than around paper. So I would keep this as your permanent copy, and I would trace it onto something that gives you the ability to trace around the edge. So you're going to be your template for cutting. Otherwise, just basic supplies that you're going to need. And as we get started with our 10-inch squares, what you're going to do is you're going to fold this twice. You're going to do a quarter fold. So first in half and then quarter, I guess. So in half this way, and you don't need to actually press, just a finger press will be fine. And then again in quarters, and keep track of where your folded edges are at. This is all of your raw edges out here, your corners. And you're going to cut and trace this onto your 10-inch square. And you'll notice that I marked on my template, so I remember fold and fold, so I get it positioned correctly. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut this shape out according to the template. And I have always finding a marking tool that actually shows up on your fabric is always kind of a challenge. This chalk liner is a light yellow. It will show up really well on the black fabric so that I can trace around that to get my shape. Now I'm going to put a pin just in the very center just to hold the layers. And since this is not like fancy, exact piecing, we can actually use our scissors. We tend to use rotary cutter for just about everything. And we're just going to cut on that marked line, the outside shape, so that we have our individual shapes. And you're going to do that on both of the fabrics. And then you're going to do that on the batting as well. So once you open this up, you're going to have what looks kind of like a flower shape or a big X. So there we go for the first. We're going to do the same on the second. So making sure we go in half and then into quarters. Everything you learned, you need to know you learned when doing laundry. So in half and in quarters, trace around it. And if you were doing multiples of these, you could pin fold a bunch up and put a pin in the fold and then trace. You could use a marker, whatever shows up on the fabric the best. On this one, the light yellow does pretty good so that I can see. I don't want this to unfold itself while I'm cutting. So just be very aware of where your fold line or edges are so that you get it positioned correctly. If not, you're going to cut it apart and then you're going to be like, oh yeah, she said something about those folds. Why were those important? And then you will be cutting a new 10-inch square. Happens to all of us. Don't feel bad if it happens to you. Okay. Now there's my lining. Great to use black so that you don't worry about a strawberry ice cream or anything leaving a mark behind. We're going to do the same thing with the batting. And the batting is kind of thick. So again, that pin will really kind of help hold the layers together. Cutting out the batting this doesn't need to be exact because this is going to be trimmed later. So we just need an approximate shape there. And again, do the same thing, being aware of where your folds are so that we get all 3 layers cut out and ready to assemble. There we go. Now, when you get down to pieces like that, then it's time to throw away the scraps. But having those pieces of batting laying around, I'm always trying to think of ways to use them up because I can hear my grandfather in my head, don't waste. And he grew up during the Depression, so he definitely understood waste. Ruth says, good morning from New York. Katie says, good morning from South Carolina. Christine is popping in to say hello from Windsor, Ontario. I love it when our Canadian quilters join us too. Carol says the mystery challenge will begin at 11. Yes, it will. We are moved from Monday because of the holiday in the United States to Tuesday at 11. So we will do the mystery quilt week 6 will be our video at 11 o'clock. Why was I unable to bring up? Maybe it hasn't been posted. We will double check to make sure that the week 6, some people get things by email, some find it under the files tab, but we'll make sure that it gets posted. Don't worry. We won't leave you out. We don't want you to miss a portion of the mystery challenge. So if you have not heard about the mystery challenge, that is the project where week at a time you get clues and instructions of units to make, and then at the end of the challenge you'll have about a 69 by 69 or so approximately sized quilt when you're done, a quilt top. So if you are interested in that, you can pop over to official National Quilters Circle community page. Under the files tab you'll find all of the patterns and the fabric and requirements in that. The videos are under the featured tab, so you can watch the videos along with downloading the different patterns, and you can be a part of that. You don't have to follow along week to week. You can do it all at once at the end. You could do it next month or next year, maybe. So just download it and enjoy those patterns. Let's see. Good afternoon from the UK, says Lorna, I believe, or Laura. Lorna, I believe it is. Okay, once we have all 3 layers cut out. Then we need to do a quick little quilt across this. So we want the layers to kind of stick together so that when you're we're using this, or when we launder it, it won't pull apart. But we're only going to quilt the outer layer just to give it a little bit of a texture to it. So we have a marking that's on the template, and I'm going to put that out there so I can just put a little notch of chalk so I can connect the dots across the shape. And we're going to do a real quick quilt across this. Now, when you do the bowl koozie one version, you're quilting both the lining and the outer portion. But because this isn't as large and the seams are a little closer together, I just did a little bit of a quilt on the outside portion just to give it some texture. If you wanted to skip this portion, you probably could, because there's not going to be a lot of shift in the layers. But since we're quilters and we like things to look quilted, I've connected that little notch that you have marked on your template. So that's the quilting line. I'm going to stitch diagonally one direction and diagonally the other to kind of get the layers to kind of hold together while we're constructing. So I have, what color thread do I have? I have black in the top and red in the bottom. So I guess it will be very evident where my quilting is on the back side of the batting. So you'll see where I stitched here quickly. This doesn't have to be overthought process. Just drive straight across one direction and then the other. This is the kind of summertime projects I like. Things that are simple, we can finish quickly, and are fun. For some reason, I kind of think of heavy patchwork and a lot of quilting as more of a winter time, because I want to go out and spend time in my flower beds. Okay, so we have this layer quilted. Now you can see where I stitched with a big X across that. The next step is to actually do the V portion that brings it up and makes it into a bowl. So we are going to put this right sides together, and you can kind of tackle two sides, one here and one here, and then we'll do a refold. So we're going to fold it like this. We're going to stitch here and over here, and that will kind of start to bring it up into that shape. We're using a 1/4 inch seam, and if your batting is it perfectly shaped, you kind of look for where your fabric edge is at, so that I need to get this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we go. I had my needle in the center position when I was doing the quilting process, and now I'm taking it back to my regular 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay. There we go. Now I'm going to go to the far side. I got one side done. I'm going to go to the far side and do this one. And I'm just kind of checking to make sure that the layer is inside there or laying flat. Just going to insert my finger to smooth out the fabrics, because the batting side is up and it's not perfectly aligned. That's okay, because we're going to trim it down here in a minute anyway. So it's okay that it's not absolutely perfect. We just want that extra layer between our hands and the container, and a little bit of an insulation layer against the cold. So I have the side here and here stitched. Now we're going to open this and refold, and we're going to do this. So I've got my seams. Now I'm going to refold and made up these two sides, so that make sure it's smooth inside there. I'm going to align my fabric edges, and again stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance down each side. There's no need for a wider seam allowance, so we'll just create extra bulk. So 1/4 is kind of typical, because as quilters that's what we're used to. Again, I'm going to go in and I'm going to kind of make sure that the fabric is laying smooth inside, and my last edge here. And then We will quickly do the same process on the lining portion. You can do a little reinforce as you get to the bottom edge. We're going to crisscross the beginning of this with another seam, but as you get to the bottom portion, if you want to do a little reinforced stitch there, that's totally fine. And then we're going to repeat the process. So learning a skill is always good if you repeat it. So fold it so that you can get the other edges aligned, the outside two edges. And without that extra bulk of the batting in there, it's a little bit faster because we don't have to worry about the lumpiness and refolding there. So try not to tug on your seam allowance, because all that is bias edge, because we made a cut across that grain there. So I've got my two outside edges here and here. Refold again, open it up. This is right sides together. Now I'm going to do the outside edges again. When you get to that second set, it's a little bit becoming shaped, so you're going to have to hold onto it a bit so that you get your cut edges aligned nice. There we go. And the last edge before we start nesting it together. If you're producing a whole bunch of these, and I did a lot of the bowl koozies at Christmas time, doing the ice cream ones is the exact same process. So you could, do all of the linings at once and do all that seaming and do with the ones with the batting all at once. Trying to do them in batches kind of makes things go a little faster. Now, on the piece that has the batting, we don't need all this extra batting in the seam allowance. We just wanted it to be caught so that it wouldn't shift. So you can go back with your scissors and you can trim away the excess batting up against the seam allowance, or up against the seam all the way around. And I'll show you what that looks like here quickly. It doesn't have to be pretty. It's all going to be on the inside when you're done. So you're going to trim it down to like that. So there's just enough caught in the edge to kind of keep the layers flat and laying there nicely so that it doesn't shift when someone's trying to use it or to launder it. So just make sure that you catch just the batting as you trim along. I thought about making the batting a little bit smaller, but with just a tiny shift, then you didn't catch it at all in the seam allowance. And it was better to trim this as you went after you had it seamed. So sorry about that step. It's just, one of those little steps that kind of make it look nicer when you're finished. And so you kind of have to endure some of those mundane tasks. This is the time when you've got your favorite music playing, or you're watching or listening to a podcast, or your favorite streaming program, because then you don't even notice that the time is going by. I made over a dozen of these at Christmas, or the bowl ones at Christmas, and all of a sudden I was to the bottom of the pile. I'm like, wow, that went faster than I thought it would. So by trimming that all out, that's pretty close. See, now we just have a tiny bit of waste. Okay, the pretty fabric is on the inside. That's going to be the outer portion. We're going to put our lining inside. This one we're going to turn. You can press seams if you like, but they're pretty much going to press themselves as we do our flip back and forth. And you can use the nose of the iron at the very end to give a press, because we're going to press along this top edge when we turn it pretty. So we've got the lining portion, nice fabric on the outside edge. We're going to drop that inside so that we can match up the top edges all along. And one of the easy things to do, and I didn't list it, but this is something that you could use. You can use pins. You can always pin areas, or you can use the little plastic wonder clips or fabric clips to hold the top edges aligned. Now, when you have seam allowances, you're trying to match those up. The best thing to do is have one seam allowance going one way and the the one you're matching going in the opposite direction. So you have opposing seams. That's easier to do if you haven't already pressed anything. So that's why I left it unpressed so that we could kind of manhandle those seam allowances to get them going in different directions. And then I'm going to put a clip right on it when I have it matched up. I'm going to go one direction with my top seam, opposite direction with the one underneath. And since it's not going to match up with anything else, doesn't matter which direction, just as long as they're opposing. There we go. And then work your way around to all four sides so that you've got them matched up. Once those are matched, then the rest kind of falls into place, because that way you know that you have everything dispersed evenly around the cozy for your ice cream. Now we're going to stitch along that top curve all the way around, but we have to remember to leave an opening so you can flip it. Okay. Some people may want to use a side seam. I didn't find that that was any easier to attack, so I just used a space along the top. It only takes about 1.5 inches or so of space in order to turn this right side out. And we have enough seam allowance that it lays fairly nice. I think I got the top edge of mine fairly finished off by hand without anyone noticing where my turning spot was at. Linda says, I recently learned about a right side and wrong side to the batting. Yes, there is a right side and a wrong side to batting. The right side is the side that we say has the dimples, and the back side, the wrong side, is the part that says has the pimples, which is kind of a weird terminology. But if you look at batting very closely, one side has a more neat, tidy appearance. And it seems like there's like little needle holes going down into it, and you have kind of a raised area. That's the nice front. That's the top, if it's batting with scrim especially. Then the back side tends to have kind of little fuzzy balls, looks like, almost like when a sweater gets worn and it gets a little pilled on the back. So the back has that not as pretty side. So that's the back. So you should always have the dimple side up. Think of smiles coming up at you when you're placing batting against your fabrics. Let's see. I've got people's comments everywhere, and I'm trying to read through them quickly. So there's lots of let's see. A lot of talk about the mystery quilt, which is nice. I appreciate that we have a lot of participants working on the 2025 mystery quilt this time around. I know that I planned some repetition into this mystery so that we would all have time for all of the other things in our lives also. And because we have quilters with wide variety of skill levels, we've got newbies doing their very first quilt. We have people who have made a few quilts, but haven't ventured into a variety of different kinds of shapes and different piecing. So we're trying to help them along the way. And for those of us who are well seasoned, sometimes it's fun to just have something simple to do. So that's why this mystery challenge has been something that hasn't taxed us extremely, just because having something fun to do once a week, to pop in, see a video, do a few pieces, and then go on your merry way, I thought was a fun approach. Maybe not for everybody, but hopefully you're having fun and enjoy the process. Now I'm stitching along that top curved edge, and I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm trying to get my curve to be as smooth as possible and take out my clips as I approach my seams. And that seam should be the spot where you kind of pivot. So needle down, pick up your presser foot, turn a bit so that you can get that kind of pronounced scallop along the top edge. I suppose you could reshape that edge if you don't like scallops. I just didn't want the cozy to come up too high against the ice cream, because they tend to fill those containers all the way to the top. We don't worry about that in a soup bowl because we're not usually filling the bowl that extremely full. But in this case, we don't really want it to like interfere with what we're eating. So it should come right up to the edge, but not bury the ice cream bowl inside or container. So as we work our way around that top, just keep in mind you need to leave yourself a hole for turning. And if you are one that may forget about that, put a pin in to let you know, hey, when you get to the pin, stop, because that's my, start, stop, leave a hole so that you can get it turned. I think of all the years I did garment sewing, I was kind of used to having turning spots or pillows or different kinds of decor things. So I'm used to leaving a hole to make a turning spot. Okay. So when we get all the way around the top of the edge, there's my turning spot. I've stitched all the way around. Now, you don't need to trim away the fabric along this curve. Just trim your batting again so that you don't have extra thickness along the top edge. And then in order to get that top edge to turn nicely, because it is shaped, we're going to do some clipping into the seam allowance. So if you are a garment sewer who comes to quilting with that background, you already kind of know on a shaped edge, you're going to want to trim the curve or notch in or make clips into the curve for it to turn nicely. If you're not a garment sewer, you're asking, but why do I need to do that step? Well, we're trying to collapse all of the seam allowance into a shaped area. And by making those clips into just the seam allowance, it gives more flexibility for the end product to keep a nice curved edge. So the seam allowance can collapse inside the finished item and give you that curve. Otherwise, you've got all that fabric trying to fold back on itself. It doesn't work really well. So take it from a person who started cutting out garment patterns in, if I told you the actual age, you would all be just dying. But my mom let me cut out my first pattern when I was in kindergarten. She was an avid seamstress, was always busy sewing. And I saw her doing that and I wanted to use the big scissors. She let me cut out a pattern. I was 6, I believe. So I've been using scissors a long time, but we're going to use just the tip of the scissors and we're going to just snip into the seam allowance, not through the seam, but just up to the seam allowance all along that curved edge. And at each seam intersection, we're going to make that so that it releases. I snipped into the seam allowance right there. So it releases the stress in that part of the V, okay? So just work your way around the project with just the tips of your scissors, making those little snips. And then that edge will give you a nice curve when we turn it right side out. Okay. If there's any other comments, I'm trying to stitch and clip and read at the same time. Okay. Kathy says that the mystery challenge is so much fun. I'm glad that you're enjoying the process. I know that it's not an easy thing to trust somebody to lead you to a finished project. I'm sure that as if I were a participant, that I might be a little anxious too, but I promise I think you're really going to love the finished project. We're going to start putting things together next week. So very soon, we are going to be having a finished quilt top. Okay, now that you have all of that clipped and trimmed and everything's looking great, I go over where my opening is at. I'm going to trim back the batting just a tiny bit more right by the opening. I'm going to take this to the iron and I'm going to press my seam allowance toward right at the opening. That's the only part I'm really going to press at this point, because if I press that, it will fold itself back on itself later when I am trying to get that outer edge to look great, and I won't have to try and tuck it later after I do the whole turning process. So I'll show you really quick here what I've done. Let me do the press. It's just a light press here along that seam, the nose of my iron. So my opening space is right here. I've trimmed the batting just a little extra. I'm pressing my seam allowances back so that it will be ready for the hand stitching to close it up at the very end. Now, if I have left enough space, let's see, I need to clip just a tiny bit there. Okay, I'm going to go in. I'm going to get a hold of the lining first. I'm going to start drawing it through. Turning it inside out is always the hardest part, I think, because we really want to see what it looks like. And we kind of give it a tug a little at a time. Where you started and stopped, you might want to do just a little bit of a reinforced stitch so that your stitching doesn't pull out as you're kind of transforming your project here a little at a time. There we go. Just nudge it through. Flip it around. You see your pretty fabric come to life. Almost there. Just a little bit at a time. There we go. Last portion. There we go. We've got it turned. Okay. Let's put that pretty fabric on the outside. And then in order to get in and turn those edges, to get those curves, you may want to either use a tool. You could use, I think there's a tool called the purple thing. It's a little plastic tool. I tend to just put my hand in, or my finger in, and use my fingernail and just kind of nudge that curve all the way to the seam allowance. Got that side. I've got one more here to do. And then the last step, and see, this is why I wanted those seam allowances already turned to the inside. And they'll naturally kind of turn themselves right there. I'm going to take this to the iron and we're going to press. Got one little stray thread. We're going to press that top edge really quick. And as I lay it down, you're going to want to work. Let's see, I'm going to get this out so you can make sure that you can see it by the camera. Get everything out of the way here. We're going to use the nose of the iron to kind of push down and give a nice curved edge along here. So I'm rolling this so that the seam allowance is right on the rim. And if you haven't done a lot of iron work, if you're new to piecing and quilting, the iron does the work for us so that the heat and the weight of the iron give us a nice press along that top edge, really rolling those seams out. And then once you have them all pressed, you can go back and you can stitch along that top edge. And that keeps that shape nicely along the top so that when it's laundered, it doesn't unroll or unfold itself. So you get a nice crisp top edge, almost a rim to the top of your koozie. Okay. And then the last side. My iron cooled down just a little bit while I was stitching there. So trying to tuck everything in, and you can kind of manipulate that opening a bit to get it to lay nicely. You're going to want to close that by hand. So what I was doing when I was making the bowl version of this is I was leaving the openings to the very end. I did my top stitch, and then after I was done, I sat down to watch a TV show and then hand stitched all of those turning areas all at once so that I was kind of accomplishing that little task without too much thought, because I know that closing up the opening isn't the funnest part to do, but you can take tiny little stitches along there and get it ready to go. So you created your version of the ice cream koozie. So let's see if we had any other questions. A nice scrappy project. And if you wanted to use up, say, test blocks that you've made. The only thing is you might run into seams, extra seams along this top edge. That would be the only issue that you might run into creating this from, say, a test block or something. So I think using up your leftover pieces from projects, from previous projects, is a great way to make that fabric, give it a new home, give it a new place to reside, and you won't feel guilty because you haven't thrown anything away or wasted anything. Let's see if there's any other comments from NC. Hello from Southeast Kentucky. Can hardly wait to make this darling thing. Love your mug. Well, the mug I got when I was shopping with some friends, but you know, having fun little projects to do that kind of lets us be creative, uses up some fabric, and still keeps us at the sewing machine. It's kind of fun to do. So thanks for joining me today.